From the seal of confession to issues of free speech on college campuses, the First Amendment and what it protects is a hot topic. And joining us tonight to weigh in on these issues is EWTN News Legal Analyst Andrea Picciotti-Bayer. Andrea, great to be with you.
Oh, thanks for having me on, Tracy.
Absolutely. There's a lot to get to, a lot with this story. But first, I want to talk about the seal of confession. And from a legal standpoint, do you anticipate these efforts gaining any traction?
You know, I think anti-Catholic bigotry always gains traction in certain circles, but we do have protection for the seal of confession, especially the Constitution's protection of religious freedom is the supreme law of the land, and I don't anticipate there being any way to breach that privilege that's been historic in any of these efforts.
Yeah, and this could really, really put priests in a tough situation right here.
You're absolutely right. And we as Catholics, we need to be committed to root out abuse of any form, and pushing back against these efforts is in no way diminishing the need that we all have as a community, as a church, to make sure to protect the vulnerable, especially children. But we can't do so at the expense of the autonomy of the church, our right to worship, and the religious freedom of the priest and the penitent.
Yeah, let's talk a little bit more about, what would happen if this were to occur?
Well, I think we've heard from a lot of leading churchmen in the country that priests are not going to break the seal. They risk excommunication if they do so. So instead, we're going to have the government pursuing priests, getting into what was said in the confessional, fining them, or even threatening imprisonment. That isn't going to address the root cause of problems of abuse. And Tracy, I'm really concerned that it might have unintended consequences where abusers aren't going to take that necessary first step to confront their offenses, and it may make the victims vulnerable if they can't find a place in which they can find accompaniment, support, encouragement, and take their own first steps in protecting their dignity and their autonomy from abuse.
Andrea, where do you see this going?
You know, I'm hoping that it goes nowhere. I'm hoping that lawmakers realize that this is just asking for lawsuits in our federal courts. If they do insist and persist in trying to breach the seal of confession through these laws, I think that religious freedom lawyers are going to be lining up to support priests, archdioceses, dioceses, and the church in general in order to defend our right to religious freedom. And at the same time, we continue to push forward to prevention, training, and any kind of assistance that we can give to law enforcement when instances of abuse do occur.
I want to pivot here. I want to talk about an incident that happened at Stanford University, where a conservative judge was asked to speak, and it got really disruptive.
Yes, Tracy, this is really a shameful event. I went to Stanford Law School. I was president of the student body for 2 of my 3 years there. And like you mentioned, Fifth Circuit Judge Kyle Duncan was invited by a student group to talk about the relationship between his court and the Supreme Court before he could even get out his remarks. He was met with ugly protests, slurs, incredible aggression. And when he asked for an administrator to come and settle the kids down, that administrator, the dean of diversity at Stanford Law School, went into a 6-minute prepared speech where she confronted him and said that he should be ashamed of his life's work. Now, Judge Duncan, before getting onto the bench, was an accomplished religious freedom advocate, representing groups like Hobby Lobby before the Supreme Court. This was a great opportunity for students, regardless of their opinions, to listen to an accomplished lawyer and judge, and they shut him down.
Almost out of time, Andrea, but this is not the first time we've seen this display at a law school. What do you think is happening?
You know, I think that elite universities and law schools are where our future leaders come from, and it's very important that administrators and students, this was only a portion of the students at Stanford Law, push back and say that our country's tradition of free speech needs to be respected both by the government and by non-state actors, peers, And we should really look to the Supreme Court that's going to be looking at some of these key free speech issues just this term as giving us guidance of the value and history behind free speech.
We're going to leave it right there. Andrea, thank you so much for coming on. Always appreciate it.
Thanks, Tracy.